What's up, investors? It's the Russian dude. Russia's military progress in Ukraine, particularly in the eastern Donetsk region, has drawn mixed reactions. While government media praises Russia's victories, capturing small abandoned towns and villages, a significant portion of Russia's public, especially pro-war bloggers and Z-Propagandists, are in denial and in disbelief, and to be honest, frankly speaking, even seem furious. Today, let's talk about these contradictions and highlight the tensions between battlefield successes and the growing domestic unrest in Russia. Since 2022, Russia has made small gains in Eastern Europe, especially in the Donetsk region. These advances, though insignificant in the grand scheme of things, were glorified by both the state media and the Z-Propagandists. Russian forces have managed to capture settlements like Bakhmut, Avdiivka, Marinka, and most recently a small village of New York in Donetsk region. They even brought New York village sign to the studio during one of propagandistic TV shows and talked about it like the Russian army was able to capture the actual New York in America. The difference is that Ukrainian New York has a population of approximately 9,000 people before the war, and for comparison reasons, the entire population of the settlement can fit into one single office spaces in a single skyscraper in the actual New York. Yet, Russian propaganda puts these two settlements in a single sentence like they're equally important for the military progress of the Russian army. Domestic television presents these victories with great pleasure, often linking them to the major historical triumphs, such as, for example, the capture of Berlin during the Second World War. Such narrative is intended to rally public support and maintain the perception that Russian forces are making significant progress, and was working well until recently. However, while these successes are emphasized and exaggerated by the state media, they are modest at best when viewed on the broader scale of the entire war. Russia's territorial gains remain relatively small when compared to the overall conflict map, but even these localized small victories come at a high cost, with Russian troops advancing into deeply entrenched and war-torn areas with multiple layers of Ukrainian defenses. And mostly, such assaults often carry no significant military or political value. They are done just for the purpose of doing something. Because the state propaganda has to deliver at least some good news from time to time to fuel the interest to war. And that's why they try so hard to picture insignificant victories as war-changing battles. This obvious difference between the official portrayal of war and the reality is becoming harder to conceal, especially as the war drags on with no clear end in sight. Ironically, amid these battlefield so-called successes, the Z-Propagandists, consisting of pro-war bloggers and commentators, they started to show signs of frustration and disbelief. These voices, initially vocal in their support for the war and the government, started to criticize the lack of leadership, logistics, and strategic planning within Russia's military commandment. This is mostly related to the incomprehensible losses with no apparent success. Daily average losses skyrocketed, while the progress on the battlefield slowed down significantly. It almost came to a stalemate, with only state propaganda trying to make these victories look big. But in reality, you will not even see the frontline changes unless you know where to look. One of potential reasons it is because the Z community got tired of these exaggerated lies. These people are interested in war. That's why they're not only receiving daily updates from the TV. They read Telegram channels, they watch YouTube videos, and they see that the Russian government apparently is fighting in a completely different conflict, where there are victories every single day. The Russian losses are non-existent, and the incompetent Ukrainian army cannot do anything better but to run away in fear. Some representatives of the Z community are even fighting in Ukraine, or they have friends, family members there, or they know someone who is fighting. So, Whenever bad things happen to these people, the war starts to directly affect them, which makes it even worse for them to watch the state propaganda about the exceptionally successful Russian army. They find themselves in disbelief, they don't trust those sources anymore, and it even makes some of them furious. Which is a very big paradox, by the way, since those people still support the idea of the invasion, but they hate the way it is done and presented. The best example of this are the updated by Igor Konashenkov. According to him, Ukraine already lost thousands of tanks, hundreds HIMARSes and Patriots, and almost every single F-16 delivered to them. And just like Ukrainians and the rest of the world, even Z-Propagandists now started to consider him as a joke and nothing more. A person with the least reliable information. Another example of this disbelief and fury is the open criticism of President Putin, something previously unthinkable. High-profile bloggers have accused him of failing to provide sufficient resources and manpower for the war efforts. These frustrations made some people think that Russia's successes in Donetsk might not be as good as they seem after all. The first disbelief was that these successes might not have happened at all. Once again, bringing us to the point that the state propaganda exaggerates insignificant achievements. The Z community simply got tired of these lies. And the second disbelief created something even more unique. Some Z-Propagandists think that this is a Ukrainian strategy to draw Russian forces deeper into vulnerable positions, just to later strike back before Russians can entrench and fortify themselves. This shift in attitude represents a dramatic change, as the very same community that once celebrated Russian victories is now filled with doubt and skepticism. And while military victories are celebrated on state media, the human cost of the conflict continues to rise. It gets harder and harder to ignore these losses for Putin, and logically, the Russian society feels that things are not going according to his plan after all. Reports from Z-Telegram bloggers describe horrific conditions for soldiers on the front lines, with severely wounded troops being sent back into battle without proper rehabilitation. Hospitals are full, and there are allegations that seriously injured soldiers are being discharged prematurely to make room for the next wave of wounded. Reportedly, there is even a huge miscommunication between field hospitals and military commanders. Even if the hospital decides to send a soldier home because he will not be able to continue fighting, this soldier he still needs to get a permission from his officer to go home. And when the soldier asks for this permission, the officer simply says, "You're fine, you have arms, legs, so stop fooling around, grab a gun and go to your comrades. They're waiting for you." So no wonder the Z community, which also knows these stories, is furious. This growing sense of disbelief is further compounded by Russia's inevitable staggering losses, despite official reports downplaying the extent of these casualties and which are still unreliable, especially if it comes from Igor Konashenko. Leaked information and independent analysis suggest that the Russian military lost numbers are way higher. The war has already claimed the lives of hundreds of thousands of people, and as more young men are sent to the front, the impact on Russian society is becoming more obvious. The demographic effects, especially on Russia's future workforce and birth rates, are likely to be long-lasting, with many citizens also leaving the country to avoid potential conscription. The long-term consequences for Russia's military campaign already started to show. While the government remains focused on securing new territories, many Russians are growing concerned about the future of their own country. The enthusiasm that once accompanied the dream of a restored great Russia is now fading, replaced by a grim reality of economic stagnation, international isolation, and a society that is increasingly fractured by the war. After all, many Russians now realize that they do not need Kherson, Zaporozhye, Luhansk, Donetsk, or even Crimea in order to be happy and in order to feel fulfilled. Most of them never been to these territories, and there is no need for them to go there. They are happy wherever they are. They have work, families to take care of, so they could not care less about how people are living in Crimea, how do they feel. This sense of national achievement when Crimea was annexed in 2014 by Russia weighs nothing more than glorified presentation of the invasion. It did not provide any benefits for the Russian society, except feeling mistreated by the West and having fewer options to choose from in the grocery stores, since many Western companies left the Russian market. And also, this, by the way, guys, I can confirm personally, based on stories from some of my friends, almost all of them live day by day and week by week, knowing that their lives can change completely next month, so simply they don't have long-term plans. And these are the stories from Russians living in the major cities, such as Moscow. So you can only imagine the uncertainty about the future from other, much smaller regions. Another key issue is Russia's decreasing population, with young men being sent to the front and many families choosing not to have children in such uncertain times. The country's demographic crisis is deepening. Many smart and young Russian people also left the country in search of better and, most importantly, stable lives. So, while the demographic problem might not be felt at full extent right now, the next generation will suffer the true horrible consequences of this conflict. This situation is worsened by the economic sanctions imposed by Western nations, which have severely limited Russia's access to international markets and technology. Domestically, the war has not only depleted Russia's military resources, but also affected its social fabric. The war's proponents, who once called for Russia's dominance in Eastern Europe, are now questioning the necessity of further expansion. Many wonder whether the limited territorial gains achieved at such a high cost are worth the sacrifices and the consequences. As the war drags on, the mood in Russia grows darker, with even pro-war voices beginning to advocate for an end of the conflict and a rethinking of the country's long-term strategy. Well, there you have it, guys. Thank you so much for watching. If you enjoyed today's episode, please like this video and subscribe to my channel for more videos like this. If you wish to support my work, there are links down below, PayPal donations, Patreon memberships for bonus content, and also you can buy the Russian Dude merch. All the links are down below. Thanks so much for watching. See you tomorrow.
We won't succumb to their tricks, the facade they try to sell. Their twisted words and feeble claims on us all they cannot quell. We see through their lies, their feeble attempts to sway. We do not believe